Hey guys, tonight we step softly across the cobbled streets of a tiny medieval market town, the air faint with the mingled scents of smoke-roasted barley and the tang of damp wool cloaks. Somewhere ahead beyond the crooked row of wattle and daub cottages, light spills warmly into the night from the doorway of a tavern. Inside, the flicker of rushlights and the murmur of low voices promise shelter from the cold. But be warned, you probably won't survive this if you get caught in a late-night brawl over whose ox has the right of way at the bridge. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just outside the heavy oak door, its planks darkened from years of rain and ale spills. The iron strap hinges gleam faintly, where the tavern keeper's hand has polished them over countless openings and closings. Above you, a swinging sign creaks in the wind, painted crudely but proudly. It shows a mug brimming with froth, perhaps with a sprig of hops curling along the rim. The paint is chipped and faded, but to any weary traveler, that sign might as well be a beacon. When you push inside, the soundscape changes instantly. Outside, the whisper of the wind in bare branches. Inside, the crackle of a hearth fire, the mutter of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. The ceiling is low, the beams blackened with years of smoke, and every surface seems to have soaked up the scents of ale, wood smoke, and humanity. The floor is uneven, with packed earth showing through in places where rush matting has worn thin. You take a moment to let your eyes adjust to the warm gloom. A medieval tavern, especially one in the sort of rural town manor lords might conjure, isn't the sprawling inn of romantic fiction. It's smaller, rougher, a practical space serving locals and the occasional traveler alike. The keeper, perhaps a stout woman with rolled-up sleeves, perhaps a wiry man with a quick smile, moves deftly between trestle tables, balancing a tray of mugs. These mugs are not the delicate glazed ceramics of later centuries, but heavy wooden tankards or simple clay cups, each slightly different, chipped from long use. You can smell the beer before you even taste it, malty, yeasty, sometimes with a faint sourness if the brew has been sitting too long. Hops, while known, are not yet universal in all medieval brewing. So many ales have a more herbal or sweet character. Sometimes other botanicals, bog, myrtle, yarrow, find their way into the mix, adding their own aromas. Drinking here is less about savoring a refined vintage and more about filling the belly and lifting the mood. In one corner, a small group of townsmen lean in over a game board scratched onto the tabletop. They drop pebbles or carve tokens into place, muttering in low voices, each move punctuated by sips of ale. Beside them, an elderly man warms his hands at the hearth, gazing into the flames, as if lost in thought, or perhaps eavesdropping. The fire is the tavern's heart. It cooks. The stew dries the damp cloaks and gives everyone a place to gather. The pot over the flames might hold a simple pottage barley, leaks a bit of pork if times are good. The aroma drifts through the room, mingling with the smell of baking bread somewhere in the back kitchen. The light is dim but steady. A few tallow candles gutter in wall niches, their wax dribbling in irregular stalactites. Rushlights, reeds dipped in animal fat burn, with a small wavering flame. This is not the bright glow of later centuries, but it's enough to make out faces, enough to read the mood of the room. And the mood is comfortable. People huddle close, not just for warmth, but for the simple pleasure of company. News, gossip, and rumor all travel faster here, than through any formal channel. As you take a seat at a vacant bench, you might notice the tavern's social order in play. The reeve or bailiff local officials are given nods of deference. Craftsmen cluster together, speaking of work and prices. A traveling merchant at another table draws curious glances. Strangers are both a novelty and a potential threat. Somewhere near the hearth, a fiddler might be tuning up, or perhaps a storyteller is working his way through a tale between sips of ale. These performances are rarely formal, more often spontaneous. A neighbor coaxed into singing a youth trying out a tune learned from his uncle. The tavern is not only a place for drink, but a venue for transactions. A farmer might arrange to sell his surplus grain to a baker. A carpenter might strike a deal for repairing a roof before winter sets in. And then there are the less official dealings, wagers, whispered promises, even the occasional clandestine meeting. In a time when most homes are small, cold, and dimly lit, the tavern's warmth and centrality make it a natural gathering point for all manner of business, honest or otherwise. If you glance toward the back, you might glimpse the sleeping loft, a ladder leading up to a cramped space where the occasional traveler can pay for a spot on a shared pallet. Privacy is minimal. The smell of straw, unwashed clothing, and damp boots permeates everything. But compared to the road on a wet November night, it's paradise. On the shelves behind the counter, the tavern keeper keeps his pride casks of ale, perhaps a jug or two of imported wine for wealthier patrons, and a scattering of mugs and jugs. There might also be small barrels of cider depending on the region, or stronger spirits if the law and supply allow. The keeper knows every face here knows who pays on time and who's slow to settle accounts. And he or she is often a quiet power in the community, able to spread or suppress rumors, to lend or withhold credit to host gatherings that shape local opinion. Out in the streets beyond the tavern door, the town is quiet, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the muffled clop of a late-returning cart horse. The tavern's glow stands out in the darkness, a reminder that within those walls is life, noise, and the comfort of human presence. For a weary peasant, a traveling craftsman, or a merchant in from the cold, this humble place is more than just a building. It's a haven. You lean back on the bench, feeling the worn wood beneath your palms. The murmur of voices blurs into a soothing background hum. A fresh mug is set before you, froth spilling gently over the rim. Outside, the night deepens, but inside the tavern's world continues small dramas, quiet joys, and the steady pulse of a community bound together by shared needs and simple pleasures. And so your night in the medieval tavern begins not as a distant observer, but as one more soul drawn to its warmth, its noise, and its promise of connection in a dark and unpredictable world. The bench you've claimed is worn smooth from countless patrons who sat here before you, farmhands in mud-spattered tunics, shepherds smelling faintly of lanolin merchants, with their belts heavy with coin. You trace the shallow grooves carved into the table's surface, initials, rough symbols, perhaps even the idle whittlings of someone who once waited too long for their drink. A sticky ring from an earlier mug glistens faintly in the lamplight, catching your fingertips as you slide them across. The conversation nearest you is low, but you catch fragments, a complaint about the miller's tolls, speculation about whether the road to the next market town is safe after dark. A younger man leans in to share something with his companion, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. You can't hear the words, but the way the other man's brows lift tells you it's something worth keeping quiet. The tavern, you realize, is a confessional of sorts, loose enough to be open and closed enough to feel safe. The air inside is thick with mingled aromas. Wood smoke still dominates, curling upward from the hearth in ghostly ribbons before dispersing into the darkened rafters. The smell of yeast and fermenting grain rides underneath, earthy and almost sweet. And here and there a sharper tang cuts through sweat-damp wool, the faint metallic edge of a blacksmith's hammer still clinging to his skin and clothes. It's not unpleasant exactly, more like the honest scent of people who work hard, drink harder, and take their pleasures where they can. Somewhere behind the bar, the tavern keeper's helper, likely a boy no older than 12, is filling mugs from a tapped cask. The ale sloshes generously, froth tumbling over the lip, as he moves with more enthusiasm than precision. His bare feet slap the floor as he weaves between tables, dodging outstretched boots and swinging elbows. Each mug he sets down is met with a grunt of thanks, a clap on the shoulder, or the occasional teasing remark about his clumsy pouring. Your attention is drawn toward the hearth. A small knot of villagers has gathered closer, drawn by the warmth, and perhaps by the man seated there, broad-shouldered, his cloak thrown back, a lute resting on his knee. He plucks a string, testing the note, then begins a tune that seems to pull the entire room a little closer together. It's not a grand performance. The melody is simple, lilting, the sort of tune you imagine drifting out of windows on summer evenings. A few people hum along under their breath. The fiddler from earlier joins in after a moment, adding a wavering harmony. The music winds through the tavern like a second fire, warming faces, loosening shoulders. Even the merchant at the far table, who has been bent over his ledger with quill in hand, looks up and allows himself a faint smile. Music here is not merely entertainment. It's an anchor, a reminder that life is more than toil and transactions. A woman with a round, weathered face ladles stew from the pot over the hearth into thick pottery bowls. She moves with efficiency, pausing only to brush a stray hair from her forehead. When your bowl reaches you, the steam rises into your face, onions leaks a hint of salted pork, the sturdy comfort of barley. You take a spoonful, and it's exactly what you'd hoped for, hot filling, and seasoned by the fire itself. Bread arrives alongside it, dark-crusted and dense, still warm from the oven. You tear off a piece, dipping it into the stew, letting it soak up every drop before you chew. The talk around you shifts with the ebb and flow of arrivals. A pair of drovers enters, shaking rain from their cloaks, and their boisterous greetings ripple outward. Someone moves over to make space for them at a bench. Oil is poured, hands are clasped, and the drovers launch into a story about the ford being washed out upriver. People lean in, eager for news that might affect tomorrow's travel or trade. This is how information travels here, person to person, mug to mug, as fluid as the ale itself. In the far corner, a small candle illuminates a dice game. The players' faces are taut with concentration as they cup the bone dice in their hands, rattle them, and let them fall onto the table. A moment later, there's a groan from one and a triumphant shout from another. A few onlookers laugh and clap, the tension dissolving into good-natured ribbing. Wagers here are rarely ruinous small coins, a promise of labor. Maybe a favor owed, but the thrill is real enough. The fire pops, sending a small burst of sparks up the chimney. Someone laughs at a joke you didn't hear, and the sound swells until it's shared by half the room. You realize the tavern has its own rhythm, conversations, rising and falling like waves, the occasional bright crest of laughter, then a settling back into the steady murmur. You feel yourself falling into that rhythm, your shoulders dropping, your mind loosening. Above your head, the rafters hold their own small world. Bunches of drying herbs hang there, sage, rosemary, perhaps some yarrow or tansy, both for cooking and for keeping pests at bay. A bundle of garlic dangles beside them, a practical deterrent against both illness and ill luck. The thatch above is thick patched in places, and dust motes dance in the faint updraft from the hearth. You suspect that if you were to look closely, you'd see initials carved into the beams from decades past, traces of patrons long gone but still part of the tavern's bones. You catch sight of a young couple tucked away near the door, their heads bent together over a shared mug. Every so often, one leans in to whisper something that makes the other laugh softly. In a community where privacy is scarce, moments like these, half-hidden, sheltered by the tavern's dimness, are precious. You look away to give them that small courtesy, turning back to the warmth of your own bench. The tavern keeper makes a slow circuit of the room, checking in with each table. Sometimes it's a word about tomorrow's weather. Sometimes a discreet reminder about settling a tab. When he reaches you, his greeting is simple but warm. You nod your thanks for the stew and ale, and he moves on his presence, both reassuring and quietly authoritative. In this space, he is more than a proprietor. He's part host, part peacekeeper, part chronicler of the life that flows through these walls. Outside, the rain has eased, but the sound of dripping from the eaves continues, a faint counterpoint to the noise within. Now and then the door opens to admit another guest, letting in a gust of damp air that makes the hearth's heat feel all the richer. Coats are hung cloaks, shaken out boots stomped dry. The new arrivals are absorbed into the crowd, their presence noted and acknowledged, but without interrupting the flow. It occurs to you that while the tavern is a place of gathering, it is also a kind of memory keeper for the town. Every conversation, every shared meal, every deal struck at these tables is woven into the unseen tapestry of the community. Years from now, someone will recall a night much like this one, not because anything momentous happened, but because the ordinary in its warmth and familiarity has a power all its own. You finish the last of your ale, the foam leaving a faint mustache that you wipe away with the back of your hand. The bowl before you is empty, only a smear of barley and onion left at the bottom. Around you, the tavern hums on the night deepens, and you know that for now, just for now, there's nowhere else you'd rather be. The lute player by the hearth eases into a slower tune now, something almost wistful, and the fiddler matches his pace. The hum of conversation quiets just a touch. Not silence, but that subtle collective leaning in that happens when a song's mood settles over a room. Even the dice players slow their rolling, letting the music ripple around them. It's not a melancholy that weighs the room down, more like a shared remembrance of something half forgotten. A harvest long past a loved one far away. The comfort of knowing the seasons turn and will turn again. The tavern's air grows thicker as the night lengthens. More candles have been lit to push back the creeping shadows, but their light is still soft and uneven, leaving pockets of shadow between the beams. In those dim corners, figures shift and whisper. A merchant leans close to the bailiff, sliding a folded scrap of parchment across the table. The bailiff tucks it away without breaking his expression. A young lad lingers by the door, glancing out into the dark street, as if waiting for someone, perhaps hoping they'll appear, perhaps dreading it. The stew pot on the hearth is nearly empty now. What remains will be scraped up later, perhaps to flavor tomorrow's bread or feed the pigs. The woman with the ladle wipes her hands on her apron and begins stacking the empty bowls. She moves without hurry, but with the steady assurance of someone who has done this every evening for years. The breadbasket beside her is down to its last few heels, dry by themselves, but perfect for mopping up the last of a mug's froth. In the middle of the room, a carpenter and a cooper debate the price of timber. The cooper claims the forest steward has raised his fees again. The carpenter says it's not the steward, but the abbey taking its share. Their words rise a notch, until the tavern keeper passes close by his presence, alone enough to settle them back into grumbling under their breath. Disputes here rarely erupt into full-blown fights, though when they do, they become stories retold for years, growing more dramatic with every telling. Near the wall, a trio of young men is testing the limits of their own laughter, egging one another into louder and bolder jokes. One slaps the table so hard his mug nearly topples, and the boy carrying drinks darts in to steady it. The tavern keeper catches the young men's eye with a look that says, "Keep it down." They comply for now, but you can tell it's only a matter of time before they push it again. The air shivers briefly as the door swings open. A gust of cool, damp air rolls in, followed by a traveler swathed in a hooded cloak. The man's boots are caked with mud, his face shadowed, but his voice is polite as he greets the tavern keeper and requests a meal and a drink. A few heads turn. Strangers are always cause for curiosity, but most soon turn back to their own business. The traveler finds a seat near the wall, removes his gloves, and begins to thaw in the room's warmth. You wonder where he's come from, what roads he's walked in this weather, and whether he carries news from farther afield than anyone else here. The fiddler's bow slows and stops. There's a smattering of quiet applause mugs raised in thanks. The lute player grins, runs a hand through his hair, and begins to pack his instrument away. In the lull, a woman's voice cuts across the room. A storyteller, you realize, rising from her bench with the confidence of one who's done this many times before. She doesn't stand on ceremony. She simply begins a tale of a fox who tricks a proud knight, each line punctuated by a sly smile and a glance around the room. Her words weave a spell of their own. People lean closer, mugs forgotten for the moment. The boy with the drinks stands still beside a table caught up in the turn of the story. The fox slips past guards. The knight stumbles into his own vanity, and laughter swells as the tale reaches its twist. When it's done, there's another round of applause and someone buys her a drink for her trouble. She accepts it with a nod, sips, and settles back into her seat. From somewhere near the hearth, the smell of roasting chestnuts joins the mix. A small iron pan has been set over the coals and the nuts crackle softly as they heat. The scent is rich, nutty, and sweet, cutting through the heaviness of the ale. A man reaches in with a pair of tongs, plucks one out, and tosses it from hand to hand to cool before peeling it. He offers a piece to his neighbor, who accepts with a grin. The night's transactions continue quietly in the background. A farmer hands over a small pouch to the tavern keeper, muttering something about last week's tote. Two women in plain wool dresses share a folded scrap of cloth, perhaps a sample for a garment to be sewn. The stranger near the wall finishes his meal and speaks softly to the bailiff, passing something under the table. The bailiff nods once, tucks it away, and returns to his drink. It strikes you again how much life passes through this single room. In daylight, the village might feel quiet, even sleepy. But here, as the day closes, all the threads of the community knot together, some in plain sight, others in shadows. The tavern is not just where people come to drink. It's where they come to be seen, to learn to test the currents of fortune that flow unseen through the town. The candles burn lower. Wax pools around their bases flickering as the draft shifts when the door opens once more. A woman enters her cloak beaded with rain. She carries a bundle wrapped in cloth and moves straight to a man seated near the hearth. They speak briefly. He takes the bundle, unties it, and inspects the contents, a set of tools, perhaps. He nods satisfied and slips a coin into her hand. She leaves again almost as quickly as she came. At your table, the last of your second mug disappears more slowly than the first. You savor the malty bitterness, letting it sit on your tongue before swallowing. The heat from the hearth seeps into your bones, loosening the tension in your shoulders. Around you, the tavern's rhythm shifts, once more slower, now steadier. The earlier bursts of laughter are replaced by the low drone of half-sleepy conversation. Someone yawns. A bench creaks as a patron stretches. The boy with the drinks begins stacking empty mugs, ferrying them back to the bar, two at a time. The tavern keeper eyes the room, gauging when it will be time to call an end to the night. He knows from long habit which patrons will leave quietly, which will linger until the last candle gutters out, and which might need a firm hand to see them to the door. From outside, a faint sound, hooves on cobbles, draws a few curious glances. The noise fades quickly, leaving behind only the soft patter of dripping water from the eaves. Inside the chestnuts are gone the stew pot, cold, the air heavy with the mingled scents of smoke ale and the press of bodies. You find yourself watching the door, as though waiting for the next small drama to step through, and you realize this is the true nature of the tavern. Not a place where great events happen, but where the slow tide of human life is most clearly felt, where the ordinary gathers and settles into something you could almost call history. The stranger in the corner has settled deeper into his seat, now his hood pushed back, to reveal a weather-creased face framed by graying hair. He sips his ale with deliberate slowness, his eyes drifting over the room, without lingering on any one person. Still, you can't help but notice how people's glances keep returning to him, as though hoping to guess his story without having to ask outright. Strangers carry weight in a village like this. They're a thread from beyond the known map, and everyone wonders what might follow if it's tugged. A faint rattle from the chimney announces the wind's return. The thatch above rustles, and somewhere in the rafters, a dry sprig of rosemary sways gently. The hearth flames bow toward the room before straightening again. No one comments. The weather is a fact of life, an uninvited guest at every table. Still, more than one person tugs a cloak tighter around their shoulders or draws closer to the fire's warmth. The tavern keeper's helper, a girl. This time her hair tied back with a strip of undyed cloth, begins making the rounds with a fresh jug of ale. She refills mugs with the easy grace of someone who's learned to dodge outstretched hands and leaning elbows without spilling a drop. Now and then she pauses to exchange a quick word with a regular laughing softly before moving on. These little exchanges are the heartbeat of the tavern, the threads that bind patron to place. At a bench near the far wall, two older men sit shoulder to shoulder, their heads bent over a small parchment map. Its rough work lines drawn by hand, blotched in places where rain or ale has smeared the ink. They point, murmur, argue in low voices. Perhaps they're discussing a hunting route, or the boundary between fields, or even a path through the forest, known only to a few. Whatever the matter, it seems important enough to warrant secrecy. A shout rises briefly from the dice table. One player has rolled a string of lucky throws, and the others groan theatrically. A few coins clink onto the table as wagers are settled. Someone fetches another jug of ale to toast the winner, who accepts his victory with mock modesty. The dice clatter again, the rhythm of the game weaving back into the room's larger hum. Your stew bowl has been cleared away, but the lingering scent of leeks and barley clings to the air near the hearth. From the kitchen behind the bar comes the faint scrape of a pot being cleaned, the dull thud of a knife on a wooden board. The tavern is in that middle stretch of the night now too late for early leavers, too early for the last lingering drinkers to be shooed out. In one shadowed corner, two women share a bench, their hands busy with a strip of wool stretched between them. One works the spindle twisting and pulling the fibers with practiced ease, while the other winds the finished yarn into a neat ball. They talk quietly as they work their voices low, but their expressions animated. It's as much a social exchange as it is a productive one. Work never truly stops, even here, but it takes on a gentler rhythm under the tavern's roof. The stranger finally speaks, not loudly, but clearly enough for the nearest tables to catch. He mentions a fair in a distant market town, a place most here have never seen. He talks of merchants selling spices that stain the fingers gold of cloth, so fine it can be drawn through a ring of musicians playing instruments shaped like nothing you've ever imagined. A ripple passes through the listeners, half curiosity, half skepticism. Stories from afar always carry that double edge. The fiddler, perhaps inspired by the talk of foreign places, takes up his bow again. This time the tune is livelier with a quick beat that makes a few patrons tap their feet under the table. The lute player joins in, and soon the melody is braided with harmonies filling the room with a warmth different from the hearth's heat. Someone claps in time, then another, until a soft percussion runs under the strings. The tavern keeper slips behind the bar, drawing another measure from a cask. He tests it, swishing the ale in his mouth before nodding approval. This small act, the quiet quality check, is just another reminder that a tavern's reputation is built in sips and swallows. Watered ale or sour brew can ruin more than a night. It can erode trust. And in a place where word travels faster than a rider, trust is everything. A group of lads by the door begin a soft-voiced song, their harmony rough but heartfelt. It's a work song, one you've heard hummed in the fields, but here in the close warmth of the tavern, it takes on a different weight. People glance over, smiling, perhaps recalling the labor that joins them all in shared fatigue. The song loops through its verses, the refrain rising each time until even the storyteller joins in from her bench. Meanwhile, the two women with the wool have finished their work. The spindle is set aside, the ball of yarn tucked into a bag. They stand stretching stiff shoulders and drift toward the hearth to warm their hands. One of them accepts a roasted chestnut from a man who has been quietly tending the pan, the exchange wordless but friendly. At the map table, the older men roll their parchment carefully and slip it into a leather case. They rise slowly, joints stiff, and make their way toward the bar. A few words with the tavern keeper, a shared laugh, and they settle onto stools for what will likely be their last drink of the night. The wind outside has picked up the door, rattling faintly in its frame. A draft snakes along the floor, curling around your boots. You draw your cloak closer, glad for the thick wool, and take another sip of ale. The drink is warmer now, less crisp, but the comfort it brings is steady. The stranger finishes his drink, and sets the empty mug down with a soft thud. He rises, adjusting his cloak, and makes his way to the door. A few nods are exchanged, but no one stops him. When the door swings open, a rush of cold air spills in, carrying the smell of wet earth. He steps out the door, closing behind him, and the tavern exhales back into itself. The fiddler's tune slows, shifts, becomes something like a lullaby. A few patrons sway slightly where they sit, eyes half closed. The conversation has quieted again. The dice game paused, the wool put away. This is the tavern's second wind, the deep breath before the last stretch of the night. You feel yourself sinking further into the bench, the heat of the hearth pooling at your back. The gentle drone of voices settling into a rhythm that could carry you towards sleep if you let it. You glance toward the window, but it's only a dark square now, the world beyond hidden. All that matters is here, the slow dance of firelight, the familiar shapes of mugs and bowls, the weight of the day's weariness slipping away in the company of others. In this room, time feels suspended, held in place by the walls and the people within them. The fiddler's lullaby fades into a gentle hum of strings, a note held just long enough to let the air absorb it. Then he lowers his bow, stretches his fingers, and reaches for his own mug. The quiet that follows isn't heavy. It's the easy stillness of people comfortable in one another's presence. You hear only the low murmur of conversation, the occasional creak of a bench, as someone shifts, and the faint pop of resin in the hearth logs. The tavern keeper moves to check the door latch, pressing it closed against the restless wind outside. A draft still snakes along the floor, stirring the rushes scattered there. They are fresh enough to carry a faint green scent beneath the overlay of smoke and ale. Bits of dried mint and lavender are mixed in the herbs, crackling faintly when stepped on small comforts meant to freshen the air and discourage the scurrying of less welcome guests. One table over a young man with ink-stained fingers is leaning forward animatedly, describing something to his companions. His words tumble quickly, too fast to follow every detail, but the glances and nods of the others show they're caught up in the telling. From the way he gestures toward the door, you suspect it's a story of the road, a run-in with a caravan perhaps, or an encounter with the Reeves men. Every so often his voice drops to a conspiratorial whisper, and the others lean in their mugs, forgotten in hand. At another table, two farmers are locked in a low-voiced discussion about livestock. One traces lines in the condensation on his mug, as if drawing a map of his fields, marking out the trouble spots. The other nods, offering suggestions, the talk sliding easily between weather grazing and the state of the common pasture. Their words are practical, grounded, and you realize that for all the tavern's warmth and fellowship, much of its life is rooted in the business of survival. Near the bar, the cooper you overheard earlier is nursing a half-finished mug, his earlier frustration softened by drink. He trades a few easy words with the tavern keeper, who listens with half an ear while refilling mugs for a pair of carters. Coins clink into the keeper's palm, disappear into a small wooden till, and are replaced by two brimming tankards that send the carters off with broad smiles. The wind outside gusts harder now, setting the sign above the door to creaking against its iron bracket. Someone glances toward the latch, but it holds. The rafters groan in sympathy, their old timbers shifting under the night's weight. A few patrons draw their cloaks tighter, hunching closer to the warmth of the hearth. The smell of roasting meat drifts in briefly from the back room, something being prepared for tomorrow's fare. perhaps a joint turning slowly on the spit, so it will be ready by midday. The boy helper is back at his rounds carrying an empty tray now and stacking spent mugs on its surface. His bare feet leave faint prints in the rushes where the herbs have been crushed flat. He weaves between benches, his eyes quick to spot the mugs drained to the last drop. Each time he bends to collect one, he pauses just long enough to see if the patron wants a refill. A small nod sends him scurrying back toward the bar to start the cycle again. The two women who had been spinning wool earlier are now seated with a pair of older men, the group bent over a shared mug. Their laughter is quiet, but warm, the kind that comes from knowing one another's stories well enough to poke gentle fun. You catch a phrase here and there, an old harvest mishap, the memory of a long-past fair, the kind of harmless tales that knit a community together over years. A single candle on the windowsill flickers as the wind nudges through the tiny gaps in the shutters. The flame leans, steadies, leans again. The tavern keeper notices and crosses the room to set the shutter more firmly. When he returns, he brings with him a gust of cool air that carries the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. For a heartbeat, the tavern smells like the outside world again, until the hearth reasserts its dominance and the door's latch clicks home. The fiddler has begun to retune his instrument, plucking at the strings with a thoughtful expression. Across the room, the lute player has taken a seat with a young lad, showing him a simple chord pattern. The boy's fingers fumble, producing an awkward twang, but the man chuckles and adjusts his grip. A few onlookers smile at the sight. It's rare to see a new set of hands learn an old tune in real time. At the dice table, fortunes have shifted. The earlier victor is now groaning over a poor throw, while another player sweeps a modest pile of coins toward himself. There's a murmured accusation of luck being helped along, met with mock outrage and a raised palm to swear innocence. The others laugh, the tension breaking before it has a chance to harden into anything more. The stranger who left earlier has been replaced by a pair of travelers in road-stained cloaks. They enter together, shaking rain from their shoulders, and make straight for the bar. Their voices are low, their movements purposeful. One removes a small bundle from his satchel and hands it across to the tavern keeper, who inspects it briefly before nodding. No one presses to see what's inside. It is understood here that some business is best left undisturbed. The roasted meat scent from the back grows stronger, blending with the nutty traces of chestnuts from earlier. A man at the bar remarks on it, and the tavern keeper replies with a cryptic, "Tomorrow's feast will be worth the wait." No more is said, but a few eyes light up at the thought of a richer meal than usual. Your own mug is half full now, the ale warmer, softer on the tongue. The din of conversation swells a little, as if the room has shrugged off the earlier lull. Someone near the hearth tells a joke that earns a ripple of laughter, and the lute strings from across the room join in with a jaunty chord. The night is bending toward its last stretch, but no one seems ready to let it end. The travelers take their seats at a bench near the wall, exchanging a quiet word with the cooper. One of them produces a small knife and begins trimming a bit of leather, the shavings curling onto the table. The other studies the room with open interest, his gaze lingering on the musicians, then the dice table, then the fire. A gust outside rattles the shutters again, but the latch holds fast. The candle on the windowsill steadies once more. The fiddler tests a lively phrase and the lute player grins in answer. You have the sense they are about to spark another round of music, to draw the room together before the night gives way to closing. And for a moment, watching the shifting faces and hearing the layered voices, you feel the tavern as more than just wood fire and drink. It is a living thing fed by the footsteps that cross its threshold, warmed by the shared breath of its people. Every night, it builds itself anew, shaped by the stories told, the deals struck, the songs sung, and the quiet companionship of those who choose to end their day here rather than alone. The fiddler leans into his lively phrase, his bow darting quick and sure across the strings. The lute joins him after only a breath, the two instruments weaving together in a spirited tune that lifts the mood of the entire room. Conversations pause mid-sentence, mugs hover midway to mouths. It's impossible not to listen. The rhythm has an infectious bounce to it, and before long a few boots are tapping in time beneath the benches. The cooper slaps the table in time with the beat, grinning at the travelers beside him. One of them, the man trimming leather earlier, sets his work aside to clap along. A woman near the hearth hums an improvised harmony, her voice steady and rich. It's not a formal performance, yet the whole tavern has been quietly drawn into it, the boundaries between musician and listener dissolving in the warmth of the shared moment. The boy helper has abandoned his tray for the moment, drawn to the music. He leans against a beam, watching the fiddler's bow with wide-eyed concentration, perhaps imagining himself mastering such an art someday. When the tavern keeper catches his pause, there's no sharp rebuke, just a faint shake of the head and the ghost of a smile. Nights like this are rare enough to forgive a small slip in duties. The music carries the scent of the hearth with it, as though the two are twined together, the fire popping in counterpoint to the strings, the shadows dancing across the beams, like silent partners in the tune. A few verses and the fiddler steps into a brighter key, the lute responding with a run of notes that tumble like water over stone. It's the kind of shift that makes you sit a little taller, as if the air itself has grown lighter. When the tune ends, it's not with a sharp stop, but a gentle slowing, a graceful landing that lets everyone linger in the echo. Applause swells, not thunderous, but warm, accompanied by raised mugs and nods of approval. The musicians trade a quick look, and then without needing to speak, shift into another melody, slower this time, drawing the energy down rather than letting it burst. Meanwhile, the travelers have set into quiet conversation with the cooper. From the fragments you catch, they're discussing road conditions and tolls, the sort of knowledge every tradesman guards closely but shares when trust is earned. The cooper nods often, occasionally glancing toward the tavern keeper, as if weighing whether to pass some tidbit along. In the corner, the dice players have taken a break, their coins stacked neatly in the middle of the table. One man is leaning back against the wall, eyes half closed, humming along with the slow tune. His companions sip ale and share idle observations about the state of the mill's grinding stones, or the rumor that the reeve might raise market fees next month. Even in leisure, the undercurrent of village life runs on. The tavern keeper makes a slow circuit of the room, stopping at each table to check on mugs and plates. When he reaches yours, he tilts his head toward your half-empty mug with a raised brow. You nod, and in a moment, a fresh pour is in front of you, the froth catching the firelight. He moves on his steps, unhurried, his ear always tuned to the tone of the room. A sharp laugh from one table, a burst of clapping from another. These are the cues by which he measures the health of the night. The air near the door shifts briefly as a latecomer slips in. This one is no traveler, but a villager, boots, muddy hair plastered from the rain. He greets a few patrons by name before making for the bar. Soon, a steaming mug of mulled ale is in his hand. the sharp scent of cloves and cinnamon wafting into the air. Spiced drink is a luxury here, something to be savored slowly, and he does just that, cupping the mug in both hands as if to draw the warmth straight into his bones. A group of 3 women near the center table has begun a quiet carding of wool, passing the combs between them in easy rhythm. Their talk ranges from the state of the harvest to whose child was seen chasing the parish goose again. Laughter comes in short bursts, and now and then a mock stern shake of the head. The work, like the conversation, is steady, unhurried, and made lighter by the company. From the back room, the scent of tomorrow's roast deepens richer now as the fat renders slowly over the coals. A man passing the kitchen doorway pauses to inhale deeply, murmuring his approval before returning to his seat. The promise of a feast has already begun to flavor the night, its anticipation adding a quiet buoyancy to the air. The fiddler and lute player wind down their slower tune, letting the last note fade into the fire's soft hiss. This time, they don't begin another. The fiddler sets his bow aside and stretches, rolling his shoulders, while the lute player drains the last of his mug. Their work for the night, at least in part, is done, and the tavern seems to exhale with them. The wind outside rattles the shutters again, this time harder, and the door creaks faintly in its frame. The candle on the windowsill gutters and flares. Someone rises to press the latch more firmly, their hand lingering there as if to test its strength. The night is a restless one, the sort that makes you grateful for thick walls and good company. By the hearth, a small knot of patrons has gathered more closely, their voices low. They speak of news from the manor, something about repairs to the mill race, the possibility of a new levy. These are the conversations that shape the weeks ahead, even if their tone remains hushed tonight. You suspect that by morning the talk will have spread to every corner of the village, shaped and reshaped in the telling. The boy helper returns to his duties, whisking away empty mugs and stacking them neatly on his tray. He moves with quiet efficiency, now the earlier distraction of music still lingering in the soft smile on his face. When the tavern keeper passes by, he receives a light pat on the shoulder, a small acknowledgement of work well done. You take another sip of your freshly poured ale, feeling the warmth of it slide down to settle comfortably in your belly. The fire's glow paints the faces around you in gold and shadow, softening the lines of fatigue, lending a quiet dignity to the simple act of being here together. You find yourself leaning back, letting the bench's solid weight support you, content to simply listen as the night unfolds in its measured way. For all its noise, its smells, its shifting currents of talk and trade, the tavern is also a place of rest. Not the silent, solitary rest of an empty bed, but the communal kind, a rest built on the knowledge that here in this moment, you are among your own, sharing in the warmth that's as much about people as it is about fire. The air inside has taken on that deep, late evening warmth, thick with wood smoke, candle wax, and the quiet musk of damp wool, steaming gently by the hearth. Every breath feels wrapped in the scent of earth and fire, as though the tavern itself has been steeped in centuries of nights just like this. You can almost imagine the layers of laughter, arguments, and songs pressed invisibly into the beams overhead, a patina of memory older than most who sit beneath them now. The lute player has joined the travelers at their bench, their conversation blending with the clink of mugs. His voice carries in low, easy tones as he spins out a story, something about a journey upriver, a flooded ford, and a cart of barrels rescued in the nick of time. The travelers listen with intent, occasionally glancing at one another, perhaps weighing the truth behind the tale. In a place like this, every good story carries equal parts fact and flourish, and the best listeners know not to ask which is which. At a nearer table, the wool-carding women have shifted to mending work. One produces a small sewing kit from her satchel, the bone needle gleaming pale in the candlelight. A child's tunic is spread across her lap, its seams worn thin, and she works at them with steady fingers, while her companions keep the conversation flowing. The talk is light now, filled with little bits of news, the first frost on the higher fields, a calf born early, a neighbor's cart losing a wheel on the hill road. Each morsel is turned over, examined, and tucked into the mental storehouse that will feed tomorrow's chatter. The dice table has resumed its quiet contest, though the stakes seem smaller than earlier. One man tosses the bones with a practiced flick, watching them tumble across the rough wood. His opponent eyes the result with mock suspicion, muttering about loaded bones to the amusement of the others. It's harmless ribbing the sort that keeps a friendly edge to the game. The tavern keeper makes his way to the hearth, bending to shift a log, so the fire blazes up again. Sparks leap, spiraling into the chimney before vanishing into the night. The flames lick higher, painting the nearby faces in gold and vermilion, pushing the chill back toward the door. You feel the extra wave of heat reach you, loosening the last knot of tension in your shoulders. The boy helper cheeks pink from the warmth, sets down a tray of fresh mugs at the table nearest the musicians. He pauses to watch the lute player laugh, then catches himself and darts back toward the bar, weaving between benches with practiced agility. A pat on the back from the cooper slows him just long enough for a whispered question, no doubt some minor errand, and then he's off again, absorbed in the endless loop of fetching, clearing, and refilling. By the window, a man in a patched cloak traces something in the condensation clouding the glass. It's too dim to make out the shape, but from the way his companion chuckles, it must be a crude jest or some private sign. The marks blur almost immediately as the warm air beads and runs, leaving only the vague impression of a moment shared. The door creaks suddenly, drawing several glances. A woman steps in, brushing raindrops from her sleeves, a small bundle tucked under one arm. She greets the tavern keeper with a nod before making her way toward the wool mender's table. There's an exchange of smiles, the bundle passed across, and unwrapped to reveal skeins of dyed yarn in deep reds and blues. Admiration circles the table as fingers test the twist and sheen to questions asked and answered in the shorthand of those who understand their craft. The fiddler, who has been quiet since his last tune, leans toward the lute player and murmurs something. A moment later, both men are tuning their instruments again. This time they choose a song everyone knows, a round that can be sung in overlapping verses. The first notes spill out, and the room answers almost instantly. Voices rise, some strong and sure, others tentative but eager. Even the tavern keeper hums under his breath as he wipes down the bar. The round loops on itself, each cycle gathering more confidence until the whole tavern feels caught in its turning. It's the sort of song that needs no beginning and no end, just the easy weaving of melody between friends and strangers alike. The travelers join in on the second turn, their accents bending the words in subtle ways, adding texture to the harmony. As the voices fade, mugs are raised in salute to nothing in particular, and the clink of pottery carries a small cheer through the air. The moment dissolves into smaller conversations again, the night's rhythm reclaiming its gentle sway. In one corner, the merchant who had been writing in his ledger earlier now leans back, his work set aside. He exchanges a few words with the bailiff, who responds with a slow nod. Their discussion seems measured, deliberate, like men weighing the pros and cons of some matter, that will affect more than just themselves. You catch phrases about fair prices and winter storage, but the rest is lost in the murmur. A faint draft slips under the door, curling around your boots. It carries with it the scent of wet leaves and the far-off tang of chimney smoke from another part of town. You imagine the streets outside slick cobblestones, puddles reflecting the dim light from shuttered windows, the muffled hush that comes when rain tames the night's usual sounds. Back inside, the fire crackles on its glow, now the dominant light, as some candles have guttered low. The wax pools at their bases, forming cloudy puddles that catch and distort the dancing shadows. The rushes on the floor are darker now, the herbs crushed flat where dozens of feet have passed over them, their fragrance a faint memory under the richer scents of ale and roasting meat. The cooper, finishing his drink, slaps the travelers on the back in farewell. They clasp hands firmly, the kind of grip that seals an unspoken pact. One of the travelers stands to fetch another round for himself, and his companion stopping briefly to greet the woolmenders. His easy manner earns him a smile and a jest, though he takes his leave before the banter can grow too familiar. By the hearth, the fiddler tests a softer tune, one meant more for the mind than the feet. It winds through the air like smoke curling around the edges of conversation without breaking it. The lute follows in low counterpoint, the two voices mingling until they're hard to separate. It's the kind of music that makes you glance at the fire and lose track of how long you've been staring. The tavern keeper lifts a fresh log to the hearth, the smell of resinous pine briefly flaring as it catches. Another hour, perhaps, before the night truly winds down, but for now the tavern breathes in a steady rhythm, the pulse of community holding everyone within its gentle grasp. You take another sip of ale, letting the warmth spread outward from your chest, and listen to the hum of voices, the quiet pluck of strings, the faint patter of rain beyond the shuttered windows. For all the world outside, this room feels like its own small country, with borders drawn in firelight and fellowship. The fiddler's softer tune lingers in the air, curling around the rafters like a cat seeking a warm perch. His bow hand moves with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows the night will let him play as long as he wishes. The lute follows in gentle lockstep, a steady undertone that holds the melody aloft. The conversation in the tavern shifts to match the pace, quieter now, a low thrum beneath the music, as if even disputes have decided to wait until tomorrow. You glance at the hearth and see that the flames have settled into a deep, glowing bed of coals. Their light is steadier than the flicker of a younger fire, and the room takes on a more uniform amber hue. Shadows lie in softer pools against the beams, and every face is brushed in the same warm tone. The heat seeps into your boots and up through your legs, loosening them after the day's walking. Near the wall, the woolmenders have finished their tasks for the night. One winds the last length of dyed yarn into a neat ball and tucks it into her satchel. Their conversation turns toward the upcoming feast the tavern keeper hinted at earlier. What dishes might appear, who will be invited, whether the roast will be venison or mutton. One woman swears she saw the keeper speaking with a hunter 2 days past. Another claims she spotted him carrying a sack heavy enough to hold a brace of hares. The speculation rolls on like a small, pleasant gamble no one minds losing. The travelers are leaning in close to the cooper now, their mugs brimming again. You hear the faintest mention of bridge repairs and avoiding the toll road before their voices drop to keep the rest hidden. The cooper nods slowly, scratching at his beard, clearly filing the information away for when it will matter. A soft knock at the door turns a few heads. It's not the gusty fling of someone stumbling in from the weather, but a measured rap as if the caller already knows they'll be admitted. The tavern keeper lifts the latch, and a man in a short hooded cape steps in. His boots are muddy, but he carries himself with a certain neatness that sets him apart from the more road-worn guests. He greets the keeper quietly, exchanges a few words, and takes a place at a small table near the window. His order, a mug of ale and a heel of bread, arrives swiftly. By the dice table, the game is over for the night. Coins have been pocketed, the dice tucked away. One man leans back, staring contentedly at the ceiling beams, while another hums a few notes of the round everyone sang earlier. The third player gathers his cloak about him, clearly debating whether to leave now or linger for one more mug. The musicians let their tune trail away and set their instruments down. The fiddler rolls his shoulders, rubbing at the back of his neck, while the lute player stretches his legs under the bench. There's a quiet murmur of appreciation from a nearby table, and someone slides a small coin across to each of them. It's not payment exactly, but a token of thanks for keeping the night warm. In the corner near the hearth, a cluster of men have drawn closer around the fire, speaking in tones too low to catch. One of them gestures toward the door, another toward the ceiling as if mapping something out. The woman with the roasted chestnuts from earlier reappears, carrying another small pan. She sets it over the coals, the shells popping softly almost at once. The rich scent drifts outward, cutting across the heavier aromas of ale and damp wool. The man in the hooded cape eats his bread slowly, dipping it into his ale between bites. Now and then he glances toward the travelers, who either don't notice or choose not to. His presence isn't threatening exactly, but it carries a weight that draws a little more attention than most quiet patrons. By the bar, the boy helper is wiping down mugs with a damp cloth, stacking them in neat rows. His gaze flicks to the musicians, then to the door, then back to his work, as if measuring how much longer the night will run. The tavern keeper joins him, collecting the day's tally from the small wooden till. He counts it quickly, the coins clinking in the hush between conversations. Outside, the wind has settled into a steady sigh, no longer rattling the shutters but brushing them rhythmically. The candle on the windowsill burns low, its pool of wax threatening to overflow the shallow dish beneath it. The man who traced something in the glass earlier leans back now, head tipped against the wall, his eyes half closed. The wool menders, their work packed away, lean in together for one last shared story. It's an old one, judging by the way they take turns adding to it. Each woman embellishing a detail, all of them laughing at moments they've clearly laughed at many times before. Their hands are idle now, folded around mugs or resting on the table's worn edge. The roasted chestnuts are ready. The woman tips them into a wooden bowl, their shells cracked and curling from the heat. She carries them slowly from table to table, offering them with a word or a smile. You accept one feeling the warmth through the shell before breaking it open. The meat inside is sweet and earthy, the kind of taste that belongs to cold nights and simple pleasures. At the musicians' table, talk has shifted to memories of past winter's snow that drifted high enough to block the tavern door nights when the fire burned so hot the thatch steamed under the frost. The fiddler recalls a feast where the roast was late and the ale nearly gone before the first slice was served. The lute player counters with a story about a runaway pig that found its way inside during a storm. The laughter they share is easy and unguarded, carrying across the room. The man in the hooded cape finishes his bread, wipes his fingers on the cloth at his table, and drains his mug. He stands, adjusts his cape, and exchanges a brief nod with the tavern keeper before stepping outside. The door closes softly behind him, letting in only the faintest whisper of the night air. The coals in the hearth shift, sending up a thin ribbon of sparks. The woman with the chestnuts takes a seat at last, settling near the wool menders. The tavern has begun its slow settling, a shift in posture, a lowering of voices, the sense that the night's great moments have already been lived. Yet no one moves to end it just yet. You sip your ale, feeling the warmth linger on your tongue, and realize how deeply the tavern has drawn you in. Hours have passed without notice, the outside world reduced to a memory beyond the shuttered windows. Here in the slow unwinding of the night, you are part of the room's memory, now woven into the low conversations, the soft music, the crackle of chestnut shells breaking between familiar fingers. The coals in the hearth burn low now, glowing a deep, steady red that pulses faintly each time a draft slips under the door. Their warmth is softer than earlier, less ablaze and more an embrace heat that settles in rather than shouts for attention. Shadows stretch longer across the walls, pooling in the far corners where the last light from the fire can't quite reach. The lute player has taken his instrument apart for the night, slipping the strings into careful slack before tucking it back into its worn case. The fiddler follows suit, winding his bowstring loose and folding a square of cloth around the fiddle's body. They share a final glance, the kind of look between friends that says, "We've done enough for tonight," and lean their instruments against the wall. Their voices take on a different cadence, now speaking of practical things, whether the next market day will draw enough coin, if the weather will hold for a trip to the next village. The wool menders sit back in their benches, mugs nearly empty. One yawns, covering her mouth quickly, and laughs at herself. Her companion nudges her and mutters something about the rooster waking her early tomorrow. The third woman stretches her legs out beneath the table toes, pointing toward the hearth's warmth, as if trying to catch every last drop before leaving. At the traveler's table, the cooper leans in to make one last point in their discussion. His hands move as he talks, tracing lines in the air, as though sketching invisible maps. The travelers nod in agreement, each taking a slow pull from their mugs before setting them down for the final time. The conversation seems to close with a clasp of hands, palms meeting in the dim light, sealing whatever understanding they've reached. The tavern keeper moves with a slower rhythm, now collecting empty mugs as he passes through the room. His steps make soft scuffs in the rushes, the sound blending into the gentle murmur of conversation. Now and then he pauses to share a word with the patron, but it's the sort of word that leans toward farewell. By the window, the man who had traced shapes earlier finally stands. He brushes at the condensation on the glass, smearing it clear enough to peer into the night. Whatever he sees makes him nod slightly before pulling on his cloak. His bench creaks as he leaves it, and he slips a coin onto the table without waiting for change. When the door opens, a cool breath of damp night air slips in with him, carrying the faint scent of wet stone and wood smoke from unseen chimneys. The boy helper makes a last circuit of the room, collecting stray bowls and stacking them on his tray. He moves with less bounce than earlier, the fatigue of the evening pulling at his shoulders. Still, his eyes are bright, pleased perhaps at having seen the night through without mishap. The tavern keeper ruffles his hair as he passes an unspoken well done in the gesture. The roasted chestnut woman finishes her own mug and stands stretching her back. She shakes hands with the wool menders, trades a brief word with the musicians, and heads for the door. Her departure leaves a small gap in the room's fabric, like a candle being gently snuffed. The cooper and travelers rise not long after. They exchange farewells with the tavern keeper, the words accompanied by the slap of palms and a clasp of forearms. Outside, you hear the faint scuff of their boots fading toward the street, swallowed quickly by the night's damp hush. The remaining patrons linger in pairs and trios, voices dropping lower with each passing moment. A man at the bar leans on his elbows, tracing idle circles in the condensation on his mug. The fiddler sips slowly, his gaze on the coals, as though listening to a tune only he can hear. The lute player rests his chin in his hand, half smiling at something the fiddler has just murmured. The tavern keeper finally begins to signal the night's close. He sets a log on the fire not to blaze but to hold the coals until morning, and moves to shutter the last open window. The candle on the windowsill sputters, once flares and dies in a wisp of smoke. The faint scent of burned wick joins the air, mingling with the heavier notes of ale and wool. A few last exchanges of coins pass quietly across tables. The wool menders finish the dregs of their mugs, wrap their cloaks about their shoulders, and make for the door. As they step out, the tavern is left noticeably quieter, the rhythm of the room changing once again. You find yourself looking around at what remains the benches, with their grooves worn by generations of elbows. The rushes scattered and trampled the darkened beams that seem to absorb the night's last words. The tavern has begun to fold in on itself, preparing to rest just as surely as the people within it. One of the last patrons by the hearth rises and tosses a small knot of kindling onto the embers, coaxing up a brief flare of orange. He watches it catch before pulling on his cloak. A nod to the tavern keeper, a brief wave to you, and he is gone. The boy helper carries his final tray to the back, the sound of pottery clicking softly together. Somewhere beyond the bar, you hear the faint splash of water as mugs are rinsed, the scrape of a stool being tucked away. The lute and fiddle are packed, leaning against the wall like sentries waiting for tomorrow. The tavern keeper returns from the back room with a cloth wiping down the last of the tables. His gaze sweeps the room, counting faces, gauging who will need gentle prompting to leave and who will rise on their own. His steps are unhurried, his manner calm. This is the ritual ending he's performed 1,000 times before. Another door, perhaps to the kitchen, opens briefly, releasing a puff of cooler air and the faint lingering scent of tomorrow's roast. It's a reminder that while this night is closing, another will follow, bringing new stories, new arrivals, and the same enduring comfort of firelight and fellowship. For now, though, the tavern's world is shrinking to its last embers, the quiet scrape of mugs and the slow murmur of parting words. You cradle your own mug, aware that your time here tonight is nearly done, but unwilling to break the spell just yet. The tavern is now a quiet island in a sea of night, its earlier bustle reduced to the bare rhythm of closing. You can hear the small sounds with new clarity, the scrape of a bench leg. As someone rises, the muffled thud of boots meeting the rush-strewn floor, the faint hiss of sap as a fresh log settles in the hearth. It's as if the air itself has thickened, holding each noise in a gentle suspension before letting it fade. The boy helper emerges from the back room with his tray empty, rubbing his eyes with the heel of one hand. The tavern keeper says something low to him, and the boy nods, shuffling toward the kitchen door. You catch the soft squeak of its hinges before it closes behind him, leaving the room to the final few patrons. At the musician's bench, the lute player has slung his case over one shoulder, the fiddler gathering his things with a slow, deliberate care. They speak briefly with the tavern keeper, their voices low, their words carrying the warm tone of long familiarity. A clasp of hands, a murmur of thanks, and they begin the short walk to the door. The fiddler pauses once, looking back toward the hearth, as if taking one last measure of the night's warmth, then follows his companion out. The door closes with a solid, comforting sound, shutting out the damp breath of the street. Near the window, a man in a broad felt hat drains his final swallow of ale. He takes his time standing, fingers running once along the rim of his mug, before setting it down with a quiet tap. A few coins clink onto the table, and he gives the tavern keeper a nod that needs no words. Moments later, he too has stepped out into the night, the latch falling gently behind him. The cooper is the last to rise from the benches along the wall. His heavy frame shifts slowly, joints stiff from sitting, and he mutters something about the cold seeping in. The tavern keeper chuckles and replies with a remark you don't quite catch, but it draws a brief grin from the cooper's weathered face. They exchange a few more quiet words before the cooper adjusts his cloak waves lazily and pushes through the door into the darkness. Now only you and two other patrons remain. One is a wiry man with a leather satchel at his feet, bent over a small parchment he's been reading for most of the night. The other, a woman in a deep blue shawl, sits with her hands folded in her lap, gazing into the embers, as though reading something there. Neither seems in any hurry to move, but their stillness feels more like a prelude to departure than true lingering. The tavern keeper begins his final sweep. His cloth moves in slow arcs over the tabletops, pushing crumbs and stray droplets into the rushes. He works without looking down his gaze, traveling instead across the room, checking the latch, the shutter, the line of mugs drying behind the bar. The routine is as familiar to him as breathing, and just as steady. You finish the last of your ale, letting the malty residue sit on your tongue for a moment before swallowing. The mug's weight is familiar in your hand now, its worn handle fitting easily against your fingers. You turn it slowly, tracing the faint grooves carved into its surface over years of use. How many hands have held it? How many conversations, confessions, and celebrations has it been part of? The wiry man with the parchment finally rolls it up, securing it with a length of twine. He slips it into his satchel, adjusts the strap across his shoulder, and stands with a soft exhale. His farewell to the tavern keeper is brief, but the keeper's answering nod carries a note of respect. A moment later, he's gone, his footfalls muted on the damp street outside. The woman in the shawl remains a moment longer. She shifts in her seat, drawing the fabric tighter around her shoulders, then rises without a word. Her steps toward the door are slow, as though savoring the last few moments of the tavern's warmth. When she reaches the threshold, she glances back, her eyes catching the firelight before the door closes behind her. At last, you are the only patron left. The tavern feels larger now, the quiet stretching into every corner. The hearth glows in patient silence. The rushes lie still beneath your boots, and the air is thick with the layered scents of the night ale wood smoke wool and the faint sweetness of chestnut shells still lingering near the fire. The tavern keeper approaches your table with a small smile, his cloth folded neatly in one hand. There's no rush in his manner, no hint of impatience. He simply asks, in the calm tone of one who has seen many such nights, if you will be finishing soon. You nod, setting your mug down with a soft click. His eyes crinkle faintly as he gives a small bow of the head, then moves away to tend to the bar. You stand feeling the bench release you from its long embrace. Your legs carry the faint heaviness of warmth and stillness, your boots sinking slightly into the rushes as you cross the floor. At the bar, you leave a few coins, more than the cost of your ale, resting them quietly on the worn wood. The tavern keeper notices his brow lifting just slightly and murmurs a word of thanks. The latch gives its small, familiar rattle as you open the door. A cool breath of night air slips in, brushing past your face and bringing with it the smell of wet stone and earth. You step out onto the cobbled street, the door closing softly behind you, with the finality of a chapter's last line. From outside the tavern is a warm shape in the dark, its windows glowing faintly like banked embers. The creak of its sign is the only sound now swinging gently in the breeze. You stand for a moment feeling the night's quiet settle around you before turning toward whatever road will take you home. Behind you inside those walls, the tavern keeper moves through the last steps of his ritual. The final log on the hearth, the shutters fastened tight, the mugs turned upside down on their shelves. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again. But for tonight, the tavern is closing its eyes, drawing the day's warmth into itself to keep until morning. The cobbled street outside feels utterly still, as though the whole town has taken a deep breath and is holding it. A fine mist hangs in the air, softening the edges of the lamplight spilling faintly from a few shutter cracks here and there. Your boots tap quietly against the stones as you move away from the tavern, but after only a few steps, you glance back. Its sign still sways gently in the breeze, creaking against its iron bracket, the painted mug barely visible in the dim light. Behind the thick walls, you know the tavern keeper is making his final rounds, tending the embers, securing the door, and perhaps savoring the last few sips from a private mug before he too turns in for the night. But the story of a tavern in a medieval town doesn't end when the last patron leaves. If you were to slip back inside now, you'd see its other face, the quiet skeleton of the day's bustle. The benches, no longer crowded, look strangely bare, the rushes on the floor scattered and flattened into odd patterns. A mug left on a table catches the last glow from the hearth, its rim beaded with the dried trace of ale foam. The tavern keeper moves slowly, now the pace of someone who knows the work is nearly done, but refuses to rush the final steps. He stacks the benches near the walls, not for tidiness alone, but to clear space for the morning sweep. The cloth in his hand moves in patient circles over the bar's surface, wiping away not just crumbs and spills, but the lingering fingerprints of the night's many small stories. In the kitchen, the boy helper is rinsing the last mugs and bowls in a wooden basin, the water clouded with the faint scent of ale and onion. He hums a fragment of a tune heard earlier, something the fiddler played when the night was still young. The sound echoes softly off the stone walls before disappearing into the steady drip of water from the ladle. A pot hangs cold over the fire's embers, its contents scraped clean, but still carrying the ghost of tonight's stew. The smell of leeks and barley lingers faintly, mixing with the drier scent of the hearth's smoke. Beside it, a half-loaf of dark bread rests under a cloth saved for tomorrow's early risers. The tavern keeper steps into the kitchen, glances at the boy's work, and nods. Together they lift the basin and carry it outside, pouring the water into the narrow runnel that runs along the street. The liquid glistens in the lamplight before vanishing into the darkness. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once, then falls silent. Back inside, the keeper hangs the cloth by the hearth to dry its corners already stiff from the night's labors. He checks the casks, running a practiced eye over their stoppers, and hoops making mental notes of what must be tapped tomorrow. The boy, still damp-handed from the basin, begins gathering kindling into a basket for the morning fire. If you look closely at the rafters now, you'd notice the stillness. The herbs that swayed gently earlier in the night now hang unmoving, their silhouettes like dark bunches of sleeping bats. The light from the hearth gives them a faint glow, the leaves' edges outlined in gold. Dust motes drift lazily in the air, visible only when they pass through a beam of firelight. The tavern keeper pauses before the hearth, poking at the coals with an iron rod. They shift and settle, sending up a last soft breath of sparks. He lays a single thick log over them, not to burn fully tonight, but to catch slowly feeding the embers until morning. This is the tavern's night watch fire, the quiet heart that will be waiting when the day returns. The boy sweeps the rushes toward the center of the room, gathering the flattened herbs and stray crumbs into a heap. The sound of the broom against the floor is soft but steady, a rhythm as familiar to the tavern's bones as the clink of mugs. He works without complaint, his small form moving methodically from corner to corner until every trace of the night's passage is drawn into his pile. When the floor is cleared, the tavern keeper unlocks a low cupboard behind the bar. From it, he draws a small jug sealed with wax. He breaks the seal, pours 2 modest measures into clay cups, and hands one to the boy. No words pass between them, only a nod of shared understanding. They drink in silence, 1 sip each, before the keeper reseals the jug and locks it away again. The boy stifles a yawn and sets his cup in the kitchen. The keeper douses the last candle by the window, leaving only the steady glow of the hearth. In the dimness, the tavern's shape changes again, less a public room, now more a private chamber, standing guard over its own quiet secrets. Outside, the mist thickens, brushing softly against the tavern's walls. The street is empty, save for the thin line of water still trickling toward the gutter from where the basin was emptied. A faint light glows in the upper window, the keeper's own quarters, perhaps, while the rest of the building settles into shadow. The night will pass, as all nights do, but for now, the tavern has withdrawn into itself, its pulse slowed, its breath quiet. Tomorrow the market bells will ring, boots will tramp in from the muddy lanes, and mugs will clink once more. But the life of the tavern isn't just in its noise. It's here too, in this calm between one day's ending and the next's beginning. And if you could stand here long enough listening closely, you might hear it even now, the faint creak of the beams as they ease under the night's weight, the tiny sigh of embers in their ash bed, and the almost imperceptible settling of the tavern's heart into sleep. The tavern's great oak door is now barred from within, the thick timber beam lowered into its iron brackets with a heavy finality. Outside, the mist clings to the narrow lane like a low cloud curling in slow eddies around the uneven cobbles. Somewhere far off, perhaps near the churchyard, a nightbird calls once and then falls silent. The sound of the village has all but ceased. Inside the glow of the hearth is the only light left in the common room. The benches and tables, so alive with noise earlier, now rest in shadow, their forms softened into indistinct shapes. The rushes on the floor have been swept into neat pools near the hearth's edge, ready to be gathered and taken out with the morning's first tasks. The scent of crushed herbs, faint lavender, bruised mint still lingers, rising softly as the warmth of the embers stirs them. The tavern keeper maunts slowly through the room, his steps almost soundless. He runs a hand along the back of each bench, checking for stray mugs or forgotten purses. His fingers find nothing tonight, but in the past he's retrieved everything from a lone glove to a small silver coin tucked deep into the rushes. These finds he keeps safe until claimed a quiet part of the trust that binds tavern to patron. From the kitchen comes the muted clink of pottery as the boy helper stacks the last of the washed mugs onto the shelf. His small figure is silhouetted in the doorway for a moment before he steps out, drying his hands on his tunic. His eyes look heavier now, but there's a light in them, a satisfaction at having carried the night to its close without faltering. The keeper gestures toward the stairs at the far end of the room, sending the boy up to his small loft space. The boy nods once, suppressing another yawn, and makes his way upward, the old steps creaking softly under his weight. By the time he reaches the top, his head is already turning toward the warmth of his bed. Left alone, the keeper lingers in the common room. He crosses to the bar and draws a final measure from a small cask, pouring it into a heavy clay mug. He doesn't sit, he rarely does at this hour, but leans against the bar, sipping slowly as his gaze travels over the empty space. This is his moment, the deep breath between one day's end and the start of another. His eyes settle on the hearth, where the coals pulse faintly beneath the log he laid earlier. Every so often, one shifts, sending up a tiny spark that dies before it can rise more than a finger's length. He knows from long habit how long the embers will last, how much warmth they will give, and how to coax them back in the morning. The tavern is a living thing to him, one that sleeps but never truly dies. A low creak from the rafters draws his attention upward. The herbs hanging there sway ever so slightly, stirred perhaps by the faintest draught or by the settling of the old beams. Their shadows paint dark, soft patterns on the ceiling shapes that seem to breathe with the slow rhythm of the night. He watches them for a moment before turning back to his drink. The bar's surface is cool beneath his hand, its grain worn smooth by countless palms, coins, and spilled mugs. He knows every knot and scratch in the wood, can recall the stories behind some of them. A knife nick from a quarrel quickly settled a deep burn mark from a candle knocked over in merriment. A faint groove where a habitual patron's ring wore into the grain over years. Finishing his drink, the keeper sets the mug down gently, the sound almost lost in the thick quiet. He straightens, stretches once, and begins the last small tasks of the night. A few mugs on the drying shelf are shifted to make space. The rag he used earlier is hung neatly near the hearth to dry by the morning. A bucket is left by the door ready for fetching water at first light. The log in the hearth has begun to glow more brightly as its heart catches. A thin thread of smoke drifts upward, curling into the chimney. The keeper watches it a moment, judging that the fire is now exactly as it should be, steady, contained, and ready to carry the warmth through to dawn. Satisfied, he lifts the bar's small countergate and passes into the back room. The door swings shut behind him with a soft click, leaving the common room to itself. Without footsteps or voices, the space feels both larger and more intimate, as though it is breathing slowly in the keeper's absence. In the stillness, you notice the little things you missed, before the faint glint of brass on the shutter, latches the subtle unevenness of the ceiling, beams the way the rushes near the hearth have been worn into gentle dips by decades of boots. It's as if the tavern, freed from the eyes and ears of the day, has slipped into its truest form. From somewhere upstairs comes the muffled sound of a bed frame settling as the boy throws himself down onto it. A moment later, the keeper's own steps cross the floor above, slower, more deliberate. Soon there is no movement at all, only the steady, low hum of the tavern at rest. The embers dim fractionally, their glow deepening to a richer red. Shadows thicken in the corners. Beyond the door, the mist drifts in slow ribbons down the street, curling into alleys and along garden walls. The village sleeps, and with it the tavern. But both hold the quiet certainty that come morning, the air will be alive again, boots stamping on the doorstep, laughter rising from the benches, mugs sliding across the bar. For now, the night keeps its hold. The tavern's heart beats low and steady, its warmth tucked away like a coal banked for winter. The tavern stands now in the deepest fold of the night, that quiet hour, when even the wind seems to hold its breath. Outside the lane is a ribbon of pale dampness under the faintest scatter of moonlight, where the mist has thinned. No footfalls echo here, no clatter of hooves, just the muted hiss of moisture settling onto stone and thatch. Inside the common room feels like the hollow of a warm hand cupped against the chill. The hearth glows with a steady ember-red heart. The single log laid there earlier, now sunk into itself, its surface crusted with fine white ash. Each slow collapse of its edges sends a small sigh of sparks upward, their brief dance illuminating the soot-blackened chimney throat before vanishing into it. The benches stand in their evening order, but without bodies to fill them. They have a faintly skeletal air, as if they're waiting patiently for their owners to return. The floor's rushes, neat in their swept piles, exhale the faint herbal perfume of bruised mint and lavender, each time a stray draft ripples through the room. The air here is warmer than outside, yet edged now with a fine coolness that hints at morning's approach. Above the rafters are still, save for the occasional settling creak, the sound carrying softly through the beams. The hanging bundles of sage, rosemary, and yarrow cast long, unmoving shadows that stretch like watchful sentinels across the ceiling. In the dimness, their forms could almost be mistaken for figures leaning over the room in quiet vigil. A faint shift of light from the staircase marks the tavern keeper's return. He steps into the room in a plain linen shirt, the heavier garments of the day laid aside. In his hand is a small candle, its flame a softer glow against the warmer hue of the hearth. He moves without hurry, his bare feet making no sound, on the packed earth patches of floor where the rushes have worn thin. His eyes move instinctively across the space, checking the shutters, the door bar, the casks behind the bar. It is not suspicion that drives this, but the habit of decades, the final assurance that his domain is at rest, and all is as it should be. Satisfied, he sets the candle on the bar and pours himself the smallest measure from a bottle kept well out of patron's sight. He doesn't drink it right away. Instead, he walks to the hearth and lowers himself onto the nearest bench. For a moment, he just sits elbows on knees, gazing into the coals. The silence is deep enough that he can hear the faint click and shift of wood fibers breaking down in the fire's heat. His breath moves in a slow, even rhythm, matched unconsciously to the quiet pulse of the flames. At last he takes a sip, slow, deliberate, the liquid's warmth spreading in him as the fire's does without. He closes his eyes briefly, perhaps calling up the night just past. The fiddler's bright tune, the dice player's laughter, the smell of roasted chestnuts curling over the hum of voices. The tavern has its own memory, but so does he, and he knows they overlap in ways too intricate to name. After a time, he sets the cup on the bench beside him and leans back, letting his gaze travel upward. The low ceiling beams are dark as riverwood carved here and there by idle hands of decades past. Initials, dates, even the crude shape of a heart. Each mark is a fragment of a night like tonight, left behind by someone who perhaps never returned, yet still lingers here in these shallow carvings. A sound from above, light irregular, draws his attention. It's the boy turning in his bed. The keeper's mouth lifts slightly at the corners. He knows the boy will sleep heavily after such a long day. Perhaps tomorrow he'll reward him with a crust thick with cheese from the morning loaf, or a chance to practice the lute strings when the tavern is quiet. The candle on the bar gutters faintly, its flame drawing lower. He takes it as his cue. Rising from the bench, he carries the cup back to the bar, sets it down, and pinches the candle's wick between thumb and forefinger. Darkness folds more completely around the room, now the hearth's glow the only surviving light. He lingers one last time at the door, laying his hand against the cool iron of the latch. The wood beneath it is worn smooth from countless turns, each one closing the tavern into its private night. He presses down just slightly, feeling the firm resistance of the bar still across its brackets. All is well. On his way back to the stairs, he pauses by the nearest bench and runs his fingers over its edge. The wood is nicked and dented, but solid, faithful. He knows exactly how it will feel under tomorrow night's guests, how it will hold the weight of elbows leaning in close over secrets or mirth. This bench, this table, this whole room, it's as constant to him as the turning of the seasons. At the foot of the stairs, he glances once more toward the hearth. The log's surface is caving inward now, its brightest heat hidden beneath a soft collapse of ash. It will keep until morning. He starts upward the old boards, giving a quiet groan under his weight, and disappears into the shadows above. The tavern is alone again. Yet in its stillness, there's no sense of emptiness, only the slow, deep rest of a place well kept and well used. The coals breathe on the herbs in the rafters, sway ever so slightly in the unseen air, and the carved initials in the beams hold their silent watch. If a passerby were to stop outside just now, they would hear nothing. They might see only the faint orange glow at the hearth through a crack in the shutter and smell the lingering perfume of wood smoke. But they would feel somehow that the tavern was not dead, only sleeping, that within those thick walls lay the memory of voices, the echo of mugs striking together through the fading strains of a song still turning in the dark. And in truth, that is exactly what it is, a place gathering itself for the next tide of life that will surge in when the door opens again. The tavern has settled into its longest breath of the night. Outside, the mist that hugged the cobbles earlier has thickened again, wrapping the narrow street in a gauzy veil. The moon is only a blurred silver disk above its light, diffused so evenly that there is no shadow to speak of, just a soft, milky dimness pressing gently against the shuttered windows. The silence is so complete you could almost believe the whole village has been spirited away. Inside the common room is steeped in a darkness made gentle by the hearth's enduring glow. The fire no longer throws flames, only the deep pulsating embers that burn with a color richer than gold. They breathe in slow, glowing sighs, their heat radiating outward to touch the nearest benches and the legs of the tables with a comforting warmth. Each faint crackle seems loud now, each soft shift of ash almost deliberate, as if the fire knows it holds the night's last voice. From the rafters, the herbs hang motionless, their scent faint but still present: rosemary, with its clean, sharp note; sage, with its earthy depth. The air is layered wood smoke at its base, herb and wool above, and the faint sweetness of yesterday's ale lingering like the memory of laughter. In the stillness, each of these scents feels more distinct, as though without the noise of the day, your senses are more willing to notice them. The tavern keeper's footsteps sound from above, slow measured, not the brisk tread of work, but the quiet pacing of someone making his final rounds in thought. A floorboard groans in the loft, followed by the muffled clink of something set upon a table. Then the sound fades, replaced by the small, settling noises of the building itself: beams, flexing thatch, shifting under the weight of mist, a faint tick from the cooling iron of the hearth's tools. If you were to walk the room now, you would feel the slight give in the rushes under your boots, the cool touch of the tabletops, the faint roughness of the wooden walls where years of brushing shoulders have polished some spots smooth, while leaving others marked with tiny nicks. You could trail your fingers along the carved initials on the benches, feel the shallow grooves filled with dust that smells faintly of char and earth. Behind the bar, the casks stand silent in their racks, their hoops glinting faintly in the ember light. A mug left drying on its side catches that glow in its rim, a thin ring of orange that brightens and dims with the fire's breath. The shelves above hold their quiet ranks of jugs and clay cups, each one ready for the moment a hand will reach for it again. Upstairs, the boy helper shifts in his bed, his weight creaking the planks beneath him. Perhaps he dreams of the night's music, or the hum of conversation, or simply of a steaming bowl of tomorrow's stew. His breathing soon evens again, a soft counterpoint to the deeper, slower breaths of the tavern itself. The keeper's own quarters lie at the far end of the loft, their door just ajar. A faint light, perhaps from a single candle, spills a warm stripe across the floorboards. Inside, he might be tallying the night's coin, jotting in a small ledger, or rubbing the stiffness from his hands. These are the closing rituals he keeps for himself, the quiet echo of the work done below. Back in the common room, the air feels almost thick with the day's ghosts. Here, a memory of the fiddler's bright notes. There, the echo of dice rattling across wood. A snatch of conversation seems almost to hover in a corner before dissolving into the hush. The tavern holds these moments, the way a stone holds the sun's heat, without effort, without need, simply because it has been shaped to do so by time. The embers shift again, a slow collapse, sending a single bright coal, rolling a finger's length before it comes to rest. Its glow flares briefly, casting the faintest shadow of the bench legs across the rushes, then fades back into the hearth's slow heartbeat. The smell of warm ash deepens, mingling with the herbs, in a way that is somehow both grounding and airy. If you stand at the center of the room now, you would hear almost nothing, only the smallest chorus of soft, living sounds, the tick of cooling wood, the far-off drip of water outside finding its way to the gutter, the faint rustle of wool in the rafters where it hangs to dry. It is a silence so complete that it begins to hum in your ears, not from sound, but from the absolute absence of it. This is the tavern at its most secret self, not a place of song or story, not a hall for trade or talk, but a shelter simply existing in the dark, keeping its warmth safe until it can be shared again. It is an animal curled in sleep, a seed in winter soil, a candle wick waiting for the match. All that it was today is folded neatly away within its walls, and all that it will be tomorrow is already here, simply resting. The night will still have a few hours yet before the first gray hint of dawn seeps in under the shutters. But the tavern will meet that light without fanfare. It will simply open its eyes, shake the night from its beams, and greet the footsteps of those who find their way to its door once more. Until then, it breathes slow and steady in the warm cocoon it has drawn tight around itself. The hours slip past in near silence, the tavern holding its warmth like a candle cupped in two hands. Outside, the mist has thickened again, blanketing the lane so completely that even the outlines of doorways and hedges blur into one another. The world beyond these walls is nothing but a damp, silver-gray dream, muffled and directionless. Within, the ember glow remains steady. The log placed on the coals earlier has burned down to a thick spine of heat, its surface dusted in pale ash. Every so often it shifts with a faint sigh, the movement so soft it could almost be mistaken for the tavern's own breath. That warmth seeps outward in slow waves, touching the nearest benches and creeping toward the bar, keeping the room's heart alive. From the rafters above, the bunches of rosemary and sage hang like quiet witnesses. Their scent has grown subtler as the night has deepened, now mingling almost imperceptibly with the wood smoke. In the stillness, the air feels layered and old, as though each breath draws in centuries of nights just like this one. Upstairs, the boy helper stirs in his sleep. A muffled sigh escapes him, followed by the faint creak of the straw-filled mattress shifting under his small weight. He is wrapped deep in blankets, no doubt dreaming of the bustle that will return with the morning, the scent of fresh bread from the oven, the lively hum of voices, the warm slap of mugs set down on busy tables. The tavern keeper lies awake for a time in his own small chamber. It is not restlessness that keeps him so much as the quiet habit of listening to the settling beams, to the weather outside, to the breathing of the building itself. In his mind, he runs through tomorrow's work, the fresh rushes to be laid, the cask to be tapped, the pot of pottage to set on before the first patrons arrive. Only when he's certain that all is ready, that the tavern can meet the day with ease, does he finally close his eyes. The common room rests undisturbed. No draft rattles the shutters now. No sound of footsteps dares the cobbles outside. The only movement is the faint rising and falling of the fire's glow, the breathing of the tavern in its sleep. The beams overhead are wrapped in shadow, the carvings of initials and hearts lost to the dark until the sun returns to coax them back into sight. You could walk the room now and leave no trace. Your boots would press softly into the rushes without stirring them. Your fingers could trail along the benches without finding a speck of fresh dust. The tavern has entered its truest stillness, the hour when all its stories from the day have been tucked into its walls, waiting to be awakened by the next round of boots, laughter, and song. Far off beyond the mist-draped lane, the faintest sound of a cockerel stirs the edges of the silence. The call does not pierce the tavern's rest. It brushes it lightly, like the first stroke of dawn against a shutter. Morning is still some distance away, but the long night has begun its slow turning toward the light. And so the tavern sleeps on. In its beams and stones, in the worn grain of its tables, in the breath of herbs that still lingers in the air, the memory of this day's life is folded and kept. Soon enough, it will open its door again to the world. But for now, in these last precious hours before dawn, it rests as every living thing must rest quiet, certain, and warm at its core. The tavern's story for this night has drawn to a close. Outside, the mist still drapes itself across the cobbles like a thick wool blanket, quieting every sound before it can fully form. The moon is little more than a pale blur, watching without judgment as the village sleeps. Inside, the last embers glow faintly in their bed of ash, their heat a private gift for the room they've guarded all night. The rushes on the floor are still the air scented with the softened traces of rosemary sage and the wood smoke that has seeped into every beam. It is the sort of stillness that doesn't feel empty. It feels full, as though the tavern itself is dreaming. Upstairs, the boy helper sleeps without stirring his breathing deep and even. The tavern keeper rests at last as well, his work done until the morning bell calls life back into these walls. All the noise, all the warmth, all the fellowship of the day is folded neatly away, tucked into the very grain of the tables and the grooves worn into the benches. In a few hours, the tavern will stir again. Doors will open, boots will stamp away the cold, and voices will fill the air in bright tumbling layers. But for now, it belongs only to the quiet. Let yourself rest there too, within these walls, in that glow and the warmth that lingers long after the fire's flames have gone. Feel the hush settle over you, the night holding you as gently as the tavern holds its own breath. And as you drift toward sleep, know that somewhere in the deep folds of time, nights like this have always been and always will be.